Aid organisations from all over the globe work in almost every country in the world in some form or another, trying to put an end to hunger and disease, to bring peace or to promote democracy and education, all simply trying to make the world a better place. But is this the truth, or just a pipe dream that fails to recognise the self-perpetuating cycle of failed missions being replaced by the same people with a so-called new strategy under a new mandate? Governmental organisations representing a global community ranging from Eastern Europe to America, and including all the major organisations such as the UN, the EU and the OSCE, have been working in Georgia for more than a decade. Since the new president, Mikhail Saakashvili, took power, there's been a renewed focus by the international community on Georgia. Their interests range from peacekeeping and humanitarian projects where they distribute food and medical aid to conflict areas, to financial gain and the security of oil supplies. But all claim they're there to help Georgia. But is this true, or do they do little more than serve themselves? Most of these organisations are based in Tbilisi and appear, on the outside at least, to work tirelessly towards their aims. Diplomatic number plates are a common sight. Ambassadors, advisors, diplomats and field workers mix in the local cafes and restaurants, while private security firms protecting them and their homes patrol the city streets trying to ensure their safety. It's a multi-million-dollar industry in itself trying to help Georgia develop their legal, political and governmental institutions, while at the same time helping maintain peace in the region. But how effective is it? In 2000, the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, better known as the OSCE, was asked to help Georgia monitor its borders. Georgia had been accused by Russia of allowing fleeing Chechen terrorists to cross easily into Georgia where they could rest and reorganise themselves. Specifically, Russia cited the Pankisi Gorge as being a hotbed of Chechen activity. Unable to convince Russia that this was not the case, Georgia asked the OSCE to help by providing monitors who could verify the truth of the situation. These monitors were placed in the mountains bordering Russia and tasked to report any illegal crossings both into or out of Georgia. This mission lasted little more than 4 years and had a budget of around 15 million euros a year, employing almost 200 international monitors and support staff. During this time it was effective in keeping Russia at bay and helped prevent attacks by supposedly unidentified military aircraft in the Pankisi Gorge and other remote mountain areas. However, they also reported on average 800 illegal crossings each year, none of which were properly investigated or acted upon by the Georgian authorities. So although it kept the Russians under control, it did little if anything to address their accusations that Georgia was incapable of controlling its borders. On the 31st of December 2004, the OSCE border monitoring mission was eventually closed down when Russia refused to back a new mandate. This, in effect, left Georgia exactly where it was before the mission was launched, its borders protected by undermotivated, under-equipped conscripts incapable of properly controlling its border regions. While Russia seemed happy with this new situation due to the fact that during this period they'd been investing heavily in their own border defences and had fortified the areas bordering Georgia. But what about Georgia? What had they done during this 4-year period? They did nothing where the borders were concerned, but preferred instead to sit back and complain to the international community that it had no money to reform the border guard service, while at the same time spending more than $180 million on their Ministry of Defence. Disheartened by the failure of the OSCE to renew its monitoring mandate, the Georgian government turned to the European Union for support. This was timed to coincide with the end of the OSCE's mandate in the vain hope that it would pressurise the Russians into accepting an extension to the OSCE border monitoring programme, where they had some influence, rather than face an EU mission where they had none. Russia called the EU's bluff and instead preferred to use the talks on the extension of the OSCE mandate as a bargaining tool over the issue of conflicting election observation reports between the OSCE's own election observers and those of the CIS, the Russian equivalent to the European Union. The OSCE refused to back down and continued to claim interference in elections held in several Russian satellite states, and so the border monitoring mandate of the OSCE was effectively ended with no EU replacement. The OSCE did not give up and responded by rewriting its mandate to appeal to the Russians and proposed a new project aimed at keeping internationals in the border regions under the guise of training, but more accurately, many would claim, at keeping as many international workers in employment as possible. In the first year after the OSCE's border monitoring operation closed, there were no obvious repercussions. Both the Georgians and the Russians appeared to have accepted each other's standpoint. The Russians no longer making accusations, content that they were controlling the border adequately from their side, while the Georgians reported no unusual activity by the Russians in the border areas. Despite this peaceful situation, the OSCE still tried to maintain a presence in the Georgian borders, claiming that this was necessary in order to keep peace between Russia and Georgia, although there was by now no evidence to support this standpoint. Regardless of the facts and despite the lack of impact their training initiative had had, they continued to justify their existence by changing their training concept and claiming that this time their new approach was actually what the Georgians really needed.
There is no direct conversation.
A year later, when this updated training programme approached its end, the OSCE launched another fruitless training initiative that again failed to take into account the realities of the Georgian border police and seemed more in the interests of protecting international jobs rather than helping Georgia. The concept was thrown together in a rush to meet the end of its mandate and based on a belief of what was needed rather than any proper assessment. Eventually its budget running to many millions of euros over 2 years and its impact on increased Georgian border security, zero. Now, still working in Georgia, the OSCE border guard projects are still continuing this cycle of failed initiatives that have had no impact. It seems that a carefully worded report and well-written project proposal are enough to justify their continued involvement and secure funding for themselves for another 12 months. The only true benefactors being the internationals employed by the OSCE. Georgia itself has all but given up on the OSCE for help where its border reforms are concerned, admitting in private that they see the OSCE efforts as pointless, but prefer to keep them around and hope that they will simply provide funding or renovate some buildings to run their projects which the Georgians can later use for themselves. Instead, Georgia turned to the European Union for help. In April 2005, at the invitation of the Georgian government, a small team of experts from the European Union Special Representative's Office undertook an exploratory mission to assess the needs of the Georgian border police. Much to the Georgians' disappointments, they proposed a small number of personnel to continue the assessment and give advice to the border police as they went. This original mission was planned to last just 6 months and would allow Georgia the opportunity to demonstrate to the European Union its commitment to working with them. The catch being that if they failed to cooperate and take the European Union's advice, this would be taken as a signal of Georgia's inability to work with the European Union on wider issues being discussed under the EU's new action plan for Georgia. In this light, it was believed that Georgia would do all it could to support the activities of the European border team. The reality turned out to be quite different. Despite no obvious cooperation from the Georgian side or any real impact on their border security, an extension of the EU's border support mission went ahead and extended the border support team's mandate for a further 12 months, regardless of its lack of results. The EU simply ignored the fact that Georgia had done almost nothing to show support for the work the EU was trying to do. In a similar vein to the OSCE, the European Union Border Support Mission